Shabbos. I got Eric to do the other Shabbos,
Who? Oh, which one is that going to be?
the 8th, the week before.
Okay.
At first he said he couldn't do it because he didn't have a car that day. I said, if we give you a ride,
What?
well,
But now we can.
yeah, actually, people are tuning in right now. Okay. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and hey there, all you internet people. I was just looking over what we've done so far. We started doing this little chat about the service on Saturday mornings, and we talked about everything at the end of the service, and we went back to the beginning, and now we're closing in on the heart of the service. Just so you know, we started on page 80, for this section, we started on page 83 with Baruch She'amar, and we talked about how it's probably an ancient piece of liturgy because it says a lot of Baruchs, but it doesn't have God's name, it doesn't have kingdom mentioned. So they added a little bit of a tag to it, saying at the end of the second paragraph, Baruch atah Adonai melech mehulal b'tishbachot, getting closer to melech ha'olam. And later on, the rabbis say things like a bracha isn't a bracha unless it has shem u'malchut, the name shem. The Yud He Vav He, God's name, and Malchut, Melech HaOlam. So here it does mention Melech, a praiseworthy, sovereign, magnified with the songs of praise. So it starts there, the section called Pasukei de Zimra, verses of song, and it goes all the way to page 106. It's a big warm-up. It's supposed to get you in the mood to do the heart of the service, as I was mentioning. What is the heart of the service? Every service has, I would love to be able to do this a bit more Socratically. If people were here, I'd say, what's the heart of the service? But since you're there and I can't quite hear you shouting at your computer screen, when I say, what is the heart of the service, let me tell you. It's the Amidah. The Amidah is the thing that you're obliged to do 3 times a day, which is even more frequently than you're obliged to say the Shema. But if you do say the Shema, then the Shema and the Amidah are like a unit. They're the centerpiece of the service. You get the Shema and the Amidah in the morning, and you get the Shema and the Amidah in the evening. The afternoon does not have the Shema because it says in the Shema that you should say it in the morning when you get up and in the evening when you lie down. Okay, so now we're at a point here where we're getting started on the service itself. We're on page 107. But before we get into any details, let me just talk a little bit about it in general, and we'll get into more details next week. But the details are the unit known as the Shema and its blessings, Kriyat Shema uver Virchotecha, starts with the Baruch Hu, because that's the call to prayer. That's when you're officially beginning the service. There's a response that the congregation gives to the Baruch Hu. The Chazan repeats that and goes on to the first blessing. The first blessing is a long blessing. Not only is it long in length, but it's what they call a long blessing in the Mishnah. That is to say, it begins with Baruch atah, And it ends over on page 110 with Baruch Atah. So a blessing that begins with Baruch Atah Hashem and then ends with Baruch Atah Hashem is what they call a long blessing. I believe it came from the long blessing in the morning. Even in a regular morning, it's a longer blessing than the second one. So, with this long blessing, what does it talk about? What are the things that it's engaged with? The second blessing before the Shema on page 111 does not start with Baruch Atah, but it does end with one, and that's called a short blessing. So you have a long blessing and a short blessing, and length is immaterial. The long ones have the Baruch Atah at the beginning and end, and the short blessings just have it at the end. All right then. Every day, every morning, it starts the same way. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam yotzer or forms light, uvare choshech, who creates darkness, oseh shalom, makes shalom, meaning peace or wholeness or completeness, uvare et hakol, and also creates everything, hakol. Now, that's not how most prayers are taken from the Bible. This particular Yotzer Or Uvare Choshech line is taken from Isaiah. And there it doesn't say this quite the same thing. There it says Yotzer Or Uvare Choshech, that part's the same. Oseh Shalom, that part's the same. Uvare et Ra, and creates evil. Well, the rabbis liked it up to there, but they didn't want to mention evil in the blessing, 222. So they changed it to hakol. In the same way, the Reform movement, when they talk in certain blessings in the Amidah, where they talk about mechayeh hametim, the restoration of the dead to life, they don't say mechayeh hametim, that caused the dead to live. They say mechayeh hakol, or et hakol. And that's a theological issue more than a grammatical issue or a aesthetic issue. But you should know that many things are coming from biblical verses. Sometimes they're changed a little bit. Maybe they're made into the plural where the verse originally was in the singular, or the other way around. So that's just a note as to what you can look for as you go through all of this. There's a special section here for Shabbat. And whenever you're talking about Shabbat, you're talking about creation. Because Shabbat's when God rested from creation. And what did God make first? If you go back to Genesis, it's the first let there be light, and then there was some the water separated, and then we got to see the sun and the moon, and in other words, the nuts and bolts, the things that are basic, scientifically engineered to be where they are. They're in orbit, the sun, the moon, the stars, everything's where it's supposed to be, and everything's doing what it's supposed to do. Now that concept is in every morning first blessing before the Shema. But I digress a little bit. I wanted to get a little bit more of a whole picture. So you have the first blessing before the Shema, the second blessing before the Shema, the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, and a blessing afterwards. In the evening, there's an additional one. But that's the structure of it. And I do want to get into what they say. Then after the Shema comes the Amidah. And the way I look at it, it's like preparing for a job interview. You're going up before a very important person, and you want to know a little bit about the company you want to work for. So you do your research, you Google everything, and you've come up with names and achievements and accomplishments and products and who did them and you know, what do you know about the way they work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you want to know something. And this is where you get to say, this is what we know about God. That he created the universe, you know, the moon, stars, sun, sky, gravity. Well, they don't mention gravity by name, but it's pretty severe. But intellectually, when everything's going the way it's supposed to, and everything's doing what it's supposed to do, the religious cognate of that is justice. In a perfect justice system, everybody's doing what they're supposed to do, and if somebody goes off track, you correct it. But justice is behind everything here. Justice is the world working the way it's supposed to. The second blessing comes up with Ahava Rabbah, a great love that God had for us by giving us the Torah, and that if we study it and we learn it, we'll know how to deal with God and with each other. Then you have Shema Yisrael. So think about this. Is it a God of justice or a God of love and mercy? The first blessing says it's about justice. The second blessing says it's about compassion and mercy and love. How can God be both things? Well, then it just says, Adonai Echad in the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. That's the answer to the question that it expects you to ask after reading the first two paragraphs. It brings them together. And from there you go into the three paragraphs that have been said in Jewish services since at least Second Temple times. So then there's a blessing afterwards, which talks about how God redeemed us from Egypt, and that's the God that interfered in history. That's the God that we came to know. And so what we know is God is powerful and just. God is merciful and compassionate. And then the three paragraphs of the Shema tells you some other things. We'll get into that a little bit next week. And then there's a blessing afterwards that says, and this God who is compassionate and just interfered in history, broke through that fourth wall and saved an entire people, took them out from within another people. It tells a story. What do you know about God? Then the Amidah comes along right after that. And now that we know what we know about God, now we're going to talk to God. It's the wind-up and the pitch. It's the preparation and then the interview. It all goes in order. So you can be thinking about that when we get to them finally. Now we're going to start our abbreviated preliminary service on page 65.
Got you. Take the lock off the ark.
I'll get to that.
That's part of preparation too.
Yep. I got to get Tony to do that. Okay. So while we were doing that, I hope you were turning to page 65, which I'm almost at myself. And away we go. I got to put on my talit. If you haven't put on your talit yet, you can do it with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit.
Amen.
And now, the blessings of the morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan l'sech v'bina להבחין בין יום ובין לילה. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני בצלמו. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני ישראל. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשני בן חורים. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam פוקח עברים. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשה לי כל צורכי. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam המכין מצעדי גבר. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam עוזר ישראל בגבורה. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam עוטר ישראל בתפארה. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam הנותן ליואב כוח. Amen, amen, amen. And we will continue on page 72. Yep, 72. Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Shabo Hayu Alevim Omrim Bebeit HaMikdash. How do you want to do this?
Let's take the top of it.
All right.
ביום השבת טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך העליון ולזמר לשמך העליון. מזמור שיר ליום השבת טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך העליון ולזמר לשמך העליון. להגיד בבוקר אסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי עשור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון וכינור. מזמור שיר לי יום השבת טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך העליון ולזמר לשמך העליון. עוד ינובון בשיבה דשנים ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא עוולת בו. And we will continue on page 80, I think. No, 81. With as if you've been tuning in at all and listen at this time, you know that this is my favorite psalm almost. If it's one of my favorite psalms because it tells you that no matter how bad things get, in the morning you can see it a fresh way. You can go to sleep crying, and in the boker you can celebrate. In the morning you can celebrate. הפקת מספדי למחולי, פיתחת שקי ותעזרני שמחה, למען יזמך כבוד ולא ידום, אדוני אלוהי לעולם עודך. And that section of Birchot HaShachar is now over, and we mark that closing of that section with a Kaddish, because every Kaddish is a punctuation point in the service. This one's a mourner's Kaddish, so if you're in mourning or observing a yurtzeit today or this week, it's the mourner's Kaddish is now. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba. B'olma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael. B'agala v'zman kari v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach li'olam l'omei omaya. Yitbarak v'yishtabak v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha brechu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata. תשבחתה ונחמתה דאמירון ביומה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. Now we begin the section called Psukei de Zimra. Page 83. Baruch Shema v'haya ha'olam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Oseh v'reshit, Baruch Omer v'yoseh, Baruch Gozer u'mekayim, Mirachim al haaretz, Baruch Mirachim al habriot, Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov l'Reav, Baruch Chai La'ad, V'kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Podeh U'matziu, Baruch Shemo. Yachid Chei Ha'olamim Melech Mishubachim Fa'ardei Shemo HaGadol, Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Mehulal Batishbachot. And we continue on page 85 at the bottom. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romimu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu l'har kodsho. And we don't do everything every week, but I think today I'm going to include page 86, the top of the bottom paragraph. Hoshia et amecha, vorech et nachalatecha, urem, 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 v'nasem, urem, v'nasem ad ha'olam. Hoshia et amecha, uvorech et nachalatecha, urem, 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 v'nasem ad ha'olam. And we're going to continue on page 88. It's an acrostic poem, this psalm, meaning it goes from Aleph to Taf. And I think this is one misses a Vav. For some reason or another, it's not in there. Maybe it was in there, but the Greek translators didn't like it, or maybe we took it out because it offended somebody. I don't know. But it was gone for a long time. At any rate, it has a few signature verses that we use in other contexts. Remember, I was telling you that a lot of prayer is taken from liturgy. Liturgy is taken from Psalms and Bible verses, and then it's changed around a little bit. Here's some things that aren't too much changed that made it into our liturgy. At the Gimel, Gadlul Adonai iti unromama shemo yachdav. And at the Yud, Yeru et Adonai kedoshav, ki ein machzor liregav, kefirim rashu v'ra'evu, v'tarshei Adonai lo chasu kol tov. And the Mem, Mi ha'ish hechafez chayim, ohev yamim, lirot tov, nitzor lishon chameira, ushvatecha medaber mirma, sur mira v'yaseh tov, bakei shalom v'rodfehu. Ha'ish hechafez chayim, ohev yamim lirot tov. So, get a lot out of that one. We'll continue on page 92. And we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. I think we're at
Lagozer, right?
Lagozer, yeah. We're going to do 4 lines from, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th little paragraph. And we'll do 4 lines, and then we'll do the last 4 lines. Legozer yam suv ligzarim ki li olam chasto Ocho ki li olam chasto v'nier paro v'chelo v'yam suv ki li olam chasto lemolichamo bamidbar ki li olam chasto shebeshivlenu zachar lanu ki li olam chasto vayifrekenu mitzarenu ki li olam chasto noten lechem lecho basar ki li olam chasto hodu le'el hashamayim ki li olam chasto. And we can turn to page 896, where we'll start at we'll say the beginning of Ashrei out loud. We'll read silently, and we'll finish Ashrei on page 97 out loud.
Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, onelucha sela.
Ashrei am shekach lo, Ashrei am shalomai Elohav, tila l'David.
Tilad Adonai yidaber pi vivarech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed v'adachnu nevarech yam ve'adav ve'ad olam hallelujah.
And we'll go down to the bottom of page 97, 2 lines up. Yimloch Adonai le'olam Elohai Tzion
Lidor Vador hallelujah.
Hallelujah. And we're going to go now to page 90, what was it? 99, 5 lines from the bottom. Yehalalu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado, hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren li'amo tehila, lecho chasidav, livnei Yisrael am kerovo, hallelujah, hallelujah. And we're going to go now to page 100 at the end of the middle section. Hallelujah, hallelujah, v'tzil tzulei shama. Hallelujah, hallelujah, v'tzil tzulei truah. Kol anshama tehallel, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol anshama tehallel, hallelujah, hallelujah. And on page 101, first paragraph, 3rd line down, another little thing that's used somewhere else in the Torah service. L'cho Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz l'cho Adonai hamamlacha v'haminaseh l'chol l'rosh. And we'll continue with some parts of the Song of the Sea. Big liberation for Jewish people in the early days. We're going to do on the 2nd line, where it says Asherah, we'll do that. Then we go down to the 4th line from the bottom, and we'll do the middle section there, Michamocha, and continue with that. And we're going to do the 2nd line up from the bottom with the last word, Nachita. So here's how it goes. Ashira Ladonai ki goga'a. Ashira Ladonai ki goga'a. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi kamocha dar ba'kodesh nachita b'chastecha amzugalta. Nachita b'chastecha amzugalta. Ashira, Ashira, Ashira. One more time. Ashira Ladonai ki goga'a. Ashira Ladonai ki goga'a. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nachita b'chastecha amzugalta. Nachita b'chastecha amzugalta. Ashira, Ashira, Ashira. And we'll conclude this section on page 104. It's not actually concluding Pesukei de Zimra, but the cantor is going to take over pretty soon. Top of the middle section, page 104. Ilufinu male shira, shira kaya ushonenu ri nakamon, kamon galab. Ilufinu male shira, Male shira, shira kayamu shonenu ri nakamon, kamon galal. Ilufinu male shira, shira kayamu shonenu ri. Come on, come on, Galab, come on, Galab, come on, Galab. Page 105, 3 lines up from the bottom of the first paragraph. Nehalechu n'shabechu n'farechechu n'varech et shem kodshecha ka'amor leDavid borchi nafshi et Adonai v'kol karavai et shem kodsho. Ha'el b'tatzumot uzecha, ha'gadol b'kvod shemecha, ha'gibur l'netzach v'hanora b'noratecha, ha'melech ha'yoshev, al kisei ram v'nisa. Third paragraph down, shochein ad.
Shochein ad marom v'kadosh shemo.
Shochein ad marom v'kadosh shemo.
V'chadu radanu tzadikim b'Adonai. V'yesharim navatehila, b'fi yisharim nidalach, v'v'divrei tzadikim nidbarach, v'v'lashon chazedim nidramah, v'kelev kedoshim tigadash, v'machalot v'vivot amchavit Yisrael. V'hodahol halal shabeach, V'velomehim lehader levarech lelekales, Hakol divrei shirot v'tishbechot, David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha.
Page 106, you're invited to rise for Yishtabach.
Yishtabach simcha halad malkinu el melech l'osh ma'atzkecha. Birachad odod metavel olam baruch Adonai.
Baruch Shemo.
El melech arobatish bachad el ahodad Adonai nivlahod. Habachel v'shilri zimra melech el chei olami.
Amen.
Yitgadav Hashem Rabba.
Amen.
Yalabah digrach relute v'yamelech malchutei. B'chayechonu v'yomecha
B'chol Beit Yisrael. Bagala, bagala, ובזמן קריב. אמן. יש מרבה מבורך, לעולם מיה יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח, ויתברך ויתמה ויתנשא ויתהדר, ויתהלל ויתהלל, שבית קודשה.
ברכו.
והילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה.
תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירה ביומה. Amen. Page 107, we remain standing for the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
You may be seated. Please join me at the beginning of the first of two blessings before the Shema. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzei or uvorei choshech aseh shalom uvorei et hakol. You may be seated, and we go to the bottom of the page silently.
Efes bildecha midomelach, hikirkecha Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, v'zelalcha malkeinu l'olam haba. Efes bildecha Eloheinu limod hamashiach, v'edomelecha Moshiach, chiyad hametim.
Page 108, El Adon.
El Adon
Al kol hamasim baruch u'vorach befi kol neshama gadol v'tuvo malei olam da'at v'vuna sovevi moto Hamigael chayot HaKodesh v'nehedar b'chavod al merkava v'chudu mishor lifnei chiso chesed v'rachamim lifnei chivodo טובים מאורות שברא אלוהים ליצרם בדעת בבינה ובהשכל כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל מלאים זיו ופיקים נוגה זיבם בכל העולם שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם עושים בהם הרצון קונם פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמו צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו בשמש ויזרח אור והתקין צורת לבנה שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום תפארת וגדולה שבחים ויוחדים וחיות הקודש. We continue. We read the top two paragraphs on page 109 to ourselves. We're on page 110.
כולם אהובים, כולם מבורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים אימה וביראה ורצון קנאה, וכולם בוכים את פיהם בקדושה וטהרה, בשבחה ובזמרה, מברך ומשבחים, ומפארים ארציים ומקדישים ומהללים את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא הקדוש הוא. נחת רוח, שפה ורוח ונעימה, קידוש העולם כאחד, Onim v'omrim b'yira.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech haaretz kevodo.
V'avadi v'chayot ha'kodesh brash gadol, minasim l'matzravim, l'madam shabachim v'yomrim,
Lo kevod Adonai minkomo.
le'abrach t'bateinu l'melech v'gam. Chadash al Zion Ta'ir v'nizgeh kulanu meira le'ora.
Chadash al Zion Ta'ir v'nizgeh kulanu meira le'ora.
Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch hu v'ruk shemo.
Yotzei ha'me'arat.
Amen. We're on page 111 with the second blessing before the Shema, Ahava Rabbah.
Ahava Rabbah Avtanu Adonai Eloheinu Echem Elad Olav Yitzera Chamalda Aleinu Avinu Malkeinu Ba'avur Avudeinu Shebarchu V'cha Shebarchu V'cha Avinu Malkeinu V'tilamdem Chukei Chaim K'dechanenu Tamidenu Avinu Ha'avaracham Rachim Rachim
Aleinu
V'tein V'libenu Le'avin V'avinu Laskil Lishmoa Lilmod U'lilamed Lishmor v'lasod U'likayim et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha B'ahava V'ha'erinenu b'Toratecha V'na'amik libeinu b'mishpotecha V'yachei livavinu V'yachava V'lira et shemecha V'lo nevo Va'ed lo nevos Li'olam va'ed
Ki v'shem
Kodecha Hagadol v'anora v'adachnu Nagila V'nismecha Nagila V'nismecha V'yeshuatecha V'havinu V'shalom
Tzitzit.
Me'ariba k'nivodaret V'tolicheinu Kol mi'miyud V'yartzeinu Ki elebo el Yeshua Adam Uvahanu v'acharida mikol ha'vilajot V'kira v'dahanu V'shimcha ha'gadol Selah Beth Emet Li'od alecha Li'acherecha Be'ahava Baruch Adonai
Baruch hu v'ruk shemo.
Ha'bocher Be'amo Yisrael Be'ahava.
Amen. Page 112.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad V'yahaveta Ehit Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha V'chol me'yodecha V'ayu ha'divarim ha'ile Asher Anochi mitzavecha Hayom ha'levavecha V'shina dam levanecha V'dibarta bam V'shivnecha b'beitecha V'lechnecha b'derech V'shach b'chal v'yikumecha V'kashar dam loda yadecha V'yildo davod mininecha V'cheda v'dam Hamzazod beitecha
The next two paragraphs very quietly. Jesus good. You may release the tzitzit. Page 114.
Join me in the middle of the page.
Please rise. Israel, Israel, Gomalino, Adonai Tzvaot Shemo Kidosh, Israel, Baruch Adonai, Go Israel. This morning's Amidah says standing and silently from pages 115 A or B, skipping page 116, that'll be in the repetition for the Kedusha, and continuing from page 117, skipping page 116, and then continuing 117 through page 120.
The reader's repetition of the Amidah begins on page 115A. You may remain seated until we get to the Kedusha at the top of page 116.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei Avoteinu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak v'Elokei Yaakov El HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chazarim Dovihim v'Konei HaKol v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Mevi Goel Livnei Bneim L'man Shemo B'Yahava Melech Ozel Moshiach U'Magid Baruch atah Adonai
Shemo.
Magid Avraham
Amen.
Ada Gibor Leolam Adonai Mechemitim Ada Rav Hoshia Morid Ada
Tal.
Mechal Kel Chayim Bechesed Bechayim Eidim Berachamim Rabim Samech Navim Berovech Olim Umadir Asurim Umekayim Abunat Ali Shenei Afar Michamocha Bagivro Umida Melach Melech Memit Umechayeh Umatzmeach Yeshua V'neman Adalach Metim Baruch atah Adonai Mechei HaMetim.
Amen. We turn to page 116 and we rise for the Kedusha.
Nikadesh et Shimcha ba'olam Gishim she'magdishim oto b'shmei ma'arav Kagadu v'yad nevi'echa V'garaz el zeh v'amar
Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh,
Adonai Tzevaot Melech haaretz kivod Hasbi kol Rosh Gadol Adif v'chadak mashbihim kol Midnasim li'umatzirafim L'madam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Kivod Adonai v'imkomo B'mkom chama kedu toviyah V'timloch aleinu et mechagim anachnu lach Madachai nimlach b'zion B'karol b'yameinu l'ilham et tishkon Tidgadal v'tidgadash b'toch Yerushalayim mirlecha L'dor v'dor l'nitzach nitzachim V'yeineinu tirena machutecha kadavar amur b'shirei uzecha Ayidei David Mashiach tzidkecha
Yimloch Adonai Le'olam, Melech Zion, L'dor v'dor, Hallelujah.
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor nagid galecha. L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor nagid galecha. Netzach netzachim, Kidushatecha nagdish, Kidushatecha nagdish. Shivchacha Eloheinu, mihipinu lo yamush, le'olam va'ed. L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor nagid galecha. L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor,
L'dor v'dor nagid galecha. Ki amelech gadol, gadol v'kadosh, gadol v'kadosh ata. Ki amelech gadol, gadol v'kadosh, gadol v'kadosh ata. Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shema.
El HaKadosh.
You may be seated, and we're continuing on page 117.
Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelka ki even ne'eman karatalo kelil tiferet b'rosh Shonadaja b'yamda levanecha al Har Sinai Shnei luchot avadim orid b'yado v'chatuv b'hem shemirat Shabbat v'chatuv b'hem shemirat Shabbat v'chatuv b'hem shemirat Shabbat v'chigatu b'toratecha v'shamnu v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדרתם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל הודי לעולם ביני ובין בני ישראל הודי לעולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש ביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש ולא נדעת Adonai Eloheinu, Gerata Eloheinu, Chata Makin, Elohim V'Sehilim, V'Gamnu Chata Leshkin V'Arehilim, Kid Yisrael, Amcha Haditahato B'Yahava, V'Zayakov, Asher B'Mbacharta, Ahami Kadesh Eshevi, Kulam Yizbu V'Dagul Mitzuvecha, V'Ashviratitabo, V'Kidashdo, Chebad Abimota Garada, Zecher L'Maseh V'Reshit. Eloheinu v'le'avoteinu, Ritzei v'menuchateinu, Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, V'din chelkeinu b'toratecha, Sameinu mituvecha, V'samchinu b'shuatecha, V'daher libeinu, Le'avdecha b'emet, V'hanchileinu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'yahava v'ratzon, Shabbat Kodesh, V'yanuchu v'Yisrael, V'kadesh Shemecha, Baruch Adonai,
Baruch Baruch Shemo.
V'kadesh HaShabbat.
Page 118.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'Amcha Yisrael v'Viladaha
V'Hashem
v'Avodah v'Beitecha Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'Amcha Yisrael v'Viladaha
V'Hashem
v'Avodah v'Beitecha
Tefilatan
v'Yavah Diliratzon Damin Avodat Yisrael Lamecha U'Tefilatam B'Yahava Dega B'Malatzon Diliratzon Damin Avodat Yisrael Lamecha Ritzei V'Techezena Hinenu B'Shivcha Tziyom Rachamim Baruch Adonai
Baruch Baruch Shemo. Amen. Modim
Adam, Kilach Rachamecha, Amarachim, Gilo Damagazadecha, Melam Givin Lulach.
Page 120 at the top.
No, 119 in the middle.
119 in the middle.
V'yahal, Glabit Bach, B'Rav Shimcha Magret V'Lelam Vahed, וכל החיים יודוך סלע, ויאמר שבך באמת, אלה שבננו זתנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני.
Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo.
הטוב שבך לכל עליונו.
Amen.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ברכנו בברכה, המשולשת בתורה, כתובה משה עבדך, אמרה מפיהו ומבניו, כהנים, עם קדושך כאמור. יברכך אדוני וישמרך.
כן יהי רצון.
יאיר אדוני, פניו אליך ויחונך.
כן יהי רצון.
יישא אדוני, פניו אליך, ויעשים לך שלום.
כן יהי רצון. Now page 120 at the top.
שים,
Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום.
Shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha.
שים,
Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום.
Shalom. Sim
טובה
uvracha.
חיים וחסד ורחמים עלינו
ועל כל ישראל עמך.
ואחינו
אבינו
כולנו
כאחד
ביור
פניך.
שים שלום, שים,
Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום.
Shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום, טובה
וברכה.
כי ביור פניך נדד עלינו
אדוני אלוהינו.
תורת
חיים,
ואהבת
חסד,
צדקה
וברכה,
ורחמים
וחיים, וחיים ושלום.
שים שלום, שים,
Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום,
Shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha. Sim. Sim.
שים שלום,
Shalom.
טובה
וברכה.
וברכה, וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך,
את עמך ישראל.
ואהבך
שם
בשלומך. שים שלום, שים, שים,
Sim shalom. Sim shalom tova uvracha לעולם.
שים,
Sim.
שים,
Sim.
שים שלום וטובה
וברכה.
ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
Amen. And we bid a fond adieu to Shacharit on page 138 with Kaddish Shalem.
יגדל וגדל שמי רבה.
אמן.
ועמד יברכו ידי והמליך לך ובחי אחד ומאחד וחלק בית ישראל ובעגלה בזמן קריב וימרו.
אמן.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך. לעולם עולם
לעולמיה יתברך.
יפרח ושתבח יתברך ונמנסה לרב יתנבט עליו שבידי קודשם.
בריחו.
אילם מכל ברכתה ושבעתה שברכתה ונחמתה דברום אדמה וימרו.
אמן.
תתגבר סוד אדמות אנוכי ישראל. קדמו נשמעיה וימרו.
אמן.
יהי שלום עליו משמיים וחיים עלינו ועל ישראל וימרו.
אמן.
עשה שלום במרומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל וימרו. אמן.
Shkoch.
ברכתי.
Take a breath. That's how we slip a little bit of yoga. We turn to page 139 and we begin the Torah service. You can remain seated until we open the ark, and then you're invited to rise if you can.
אין כמוך ואלוהים אדוני ואין כמעשיך מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך להביא, אדוני עושה עמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. ברוך אביב, היטיב ברצונך את ציון, תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים, כי Avnu Melech Rabbi Nisa Adam Alamim. Vayivit Sahara Vayamer Moshe Kulma Adonai V'yafutzu Oivecha V'yadusu Misalecha V'vanecha Ki Mitziach Heisei Torah Ki Mitziach Heisei Torah L'divar Adonai B'Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Yerushalayim.
Page 140, second paragraph, Be'an Arachetz. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I could have sworn someone just said Shabbat Shalom. A number of interesting things have happened this week in the history of the Jewish people. Let's take a look at some of them, shall we? Oh, this is a fun thing. On April 11th, 1909, the city of Tel Aviv was founded. On April 12th, 1951, the Knesset passed a resolution designating Nisan 27th as Yom HaShoah. The United Nations picked, I think it was January 27th or 28th, as the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, that the UN takes note of it. But they picked the date that the camps were liberated, which pegs the people as victims that needed to be liberated. It's not that it's untrue, but the Knesset passed the date as Nisan 27 as Yom HaShoah. It would have been Nisan, the actual, what it commemorates is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which happened on, I believe, the night of the first Seder, Passover. And they did not want to taint Passover with remembering the Holocaust. So they picked a time shortly after Passover was over, and they picked Nisan 27. April the 13th, 1823, Sabato Moraes, first president of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, was born, 1823. April 14th, it's an actor, it's a birthday. He was born in 1925. Any guesses? Okay, I'll give you a hint. The pawnbroker. No? Okay. He was in a lot of things. No Way to Treat a Lady. He was really a great actor. Rod Steiger.
He was in The Chosen.
Oh, was he? Yeah, he was the rabbi. He was, yeah, right. You know, he wasn't, yeah.
And wasn't he part of Twilight Zone? Didn't he have like a,
Part of what?
didn't he appear in the Twilight Zone at times?
He may have. A lot of people have appeared in the Twilight Zone.
Right.
You know, Robert Redford, Elizabeth Montgomery, you know, William Shatner. And a lot of people appeared in the Twilight Zone. We're going back to my high holiday sermon of last year. April 15th, 1907, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise founded the Free Synagogue in New York, a Reform synagogue. April 16th, Jews in the German Empire were emancipated in 1871. That was a good thing. And on April 17th, today's the 17th? Yeah. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happened here, but it was in 1848, and the gates of the ghetto of Rome were pulled down by the citizens of Rome. And to me, this is sounding like that was a good thing, that they didn't want the people shut up in the ghetto anymore. They tore the gates down so the people could get out. I hope I'm right. Okay, so there's a little bit of history for us.
Another little bit of history this Shabbat. I told my daughter I'd mentioned it at this time. This is the 8th anniversary of her bat mitzvah. Tazria Metzora. Of course, I was on a different date in 2013, but here we are 8 years later on this Shabbat.
Yep, here we are.
And I get to do our Haftarah. Last year, by the way, I looked it up, because I don't recall doing it last year because it was Rosh Chodesh last year on Tazria Metzora. You know, it always, Rosh Chodesh always falls, Pesach sometime around this time.
Yeah.
So, but this year, I'll get to do it, so.
Well, we're all looking forward to that. Shabbat goes out tonight at 8:03, in case you were wondering. Why don't we just count the Omer now while we're paused?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Yesterday was the 19th day of the Omer. So today we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer. And Hayom Esrim Yom Shehem Shnei Shavuot V'Shisha Yamim LaOmer Yisod Shevet Tiferet. Okay. Now today's parsha, as Zev mentioned, is a double parsha, Tazria Metzora. I always, whenever I hear Tazria Metzora, I think of Hakuna Matata. It's got the same rhythm, yeah. No worries. But it's not. It's not Hakuna Matata. Because of the way the Jewish calendar works, we add a month 7 times in every 19-year cycle in order to keep Pesach in the spring and Sukkot in the fall, et cetera, But in the years when we don't add a month, like this year, we have to have double parshiot to get all the parshiot in. The Torah in our weekly readings has been talking about the job of the priest, and today we are continuing that discussion. It's always a challenge to talk about the issues, for want of a better word, involved in today's parsha, and practically most of Leviticus, but today particularly. What possible relevance can we see in a world that sees leprosy in the walls of your house and tuma, or ritual impurity, hovering over everyone all the time? We might as well ask, what does Judaism teach us about cooties? But here we have it. It's in the Torah, and the Torah is supposed to be the blueprint of life. Seems to take a certain perspective to see it that way, though. So let's see if we can get some of that. Now, there are rules from the Torah that we can understand readily. Don't kidnap, don't murder, don't be cruel to people or animals, pay wages when they're earned, compensate the wronged for damages, be fair, have one set of weights for everyone, don't take bribes, and when it comes to justice, establish fair courts and treat everyone, rich or poor, citizen or stranger, with a cold, dispassionate eye of justice tempered by warm, compassionate mercy. We can understand those laws. All of these laws would yield a decent society few of us would have problems living in. I would even say that what I just described, with few additions, would describe a world most of us would want to live in, a modern society with liberty, justice, and freedom for all. And we can do all that without much religion or religious background. The secular humanists describe their ideal world not too differently. But the Torah also tells us that as a people, a people charged with being holy because God is holy, we are to do more than the minimum. And it says in Exodus chapter 19 that we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So in addition to making a just society, we're asked to do something more. So it gives us a way to do that. It gives us a way to see that as good a world as we can get by our human efforts, there's always a little more to challenge the mind and the soul of a person seeking that closeness to God. So to help see this, let's go back and see if we can put our minds back to the days when we left Egypt. I mean, after all, the Haggadah tells us, and it's quoting the Torah when it does this, that each person in every generation has to look at himself or herself as if he or she had personally come forth out of the land of Egypt. So don't close your eyes. I don't trust you. But imagine we were just given freedom, and we didn't know what to do with it. We had seen the plagues, and the sea split, and we saw the giving and heard the giving of the 10 Commandments. So even though we are a stiff-necked, stubborn, complaining, and rebellious people, we have seen on the very basic level the power of a higher power. We call that higher power God. And now we have this wonderful new building, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and we did a building fund drive for that. And here in this building, we are told that we will be able to encounter God's presence. Now, the sociologists and the anthropologists will tell you that all societies have their gods, and they most resemble the things that society needs most to survive. The gods of rain and sun and land and love and etc. Well, our God told us that we needed our freedom. And if you want to get in on some of the power that did that, well, here you go. There's a book that summarizes what the priests do. It's called Leviticus, or Vayikra. And you can get it for less on Nile.com. They didn't know about Amazon at the time. They were in a different part of the world. So Leviticus comes to make a couple of points. One is that we should, first of all, be good to each other. And then we should work at being holy. Holy, that is to say, going beyond fair, decent. We should work on getting close to God. That's what the Leviticus is telling us. Maybe we can't be God, but we have a chance of tapping into some of God's energy, so to speak. We can't be God, but by tapping into some of what Moses had, we can be better than we are. As many of you know, the word for getting close to God and the word for what we call in English sacrifice are the same word in Hebrew. They come from the word karev, to get close. The sacrifice gets you closer to God. And why not? After all religious activities converges on the mystic. Mystic means striving to come in contact with the highest power of the universe. How can we come to know God? How can we see God, feel God, come in contact somehow with God? And the first step in that process is understanding how God made the world. And I don't mean mechanically. Let's assume God used evolution to do it and that the days mentioned in Genesis could be billions of our years long, okay? You can look up a couple of books by Gerald Schroeder who explains this in a scientific way. There's a joke, and you have to have heard this before, but it's appropriate here. A man prays, "O God, to you, for whom 1,000,000 years is but a second, and $1,000,000 is but a penny. I pray to you, dear God, give me a penny." And the heavens open, the lights come on, a beam of light shines down from the open clouds, and a voice comes down, "Just a second." But the point is, God started with the lowest elements and worked up to people. First there were plants, and then fruit trees, then lower animals like creepy crawlies and fish, and then animals that walked in the land, and eventually people. The evolutionists and the creationists agree on that order. It was a process. It took time. That's what they disagree about. and it isn't over. We're not done. You see, if you look at it as a process, then people can evolve even further. Kingdom of priests, holy nation. Those opening lines in Genesis about creation speak in what Jonathan Sacks calls the priestly voice, and what Bible scholars call the P source, the priestly source in the priestly code. There may be many ways for an ordinary person today to be like a priest. An ordinary person can learn to read and write and then teach. And these were things that only a priest could do in other cultures. So I think we can look to the priests to set the gold standard as to how to run a holy society. If you're looking to be a holy society, our best model is the priests. But it's hard to trust people who claim to be holy, because there's a lot of really good religious leaders out there. I was involved with an interfaith group that brought in people from all over the world, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. We brought in a lot of people. And that organization is still going. It's called the Elijah Institute. But there are also, when you think of these, when somebody says, I'm a holy person, or gets labeled as a holy person, we think cynically of, I go back to Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Reverend Ike. Do you remember the preacher, Ted Haggard? He was featured prominently in the book and the movie Constantine's Sword. He viciously preached against homosexuality, and then it came to light that he'd been having an affair with a male gay prostitute for years. So it's hard to trust them. But just as we are disappointed, or we get cynical now when we hear of so-called holy people abusing their rank and privilege, so it was in the Bible when a priest would behave in a manner unbecoming of a religious person. They condemned it too. In the first book of Samuel, in the book of 1 Samuel, however you want to call it, you might remember the story. Eli was the high priest in the town of Shiloh, and his sons were known to treat, oh boy. I'll start that part again. Eli was the high priest in the town of Shiloh, and his sons were known to treat the offerings that people would bring with contempt and disrespect. It says in today's Parsha, for example, when a woman gives birth, she's excused from going to the religious rites because she has to stay with the child for a certain number of days. And that's more important than going to the temple. At the end of the time, the woman was to bring a sacrifice so she could enter normal life again. But Eli's sons would just keep the animals for themselves. It even says something rather crude, that they slept with the women who brought the sacrifices. You can check that out. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 22 nails it. Now, there's some Talmudic whitewashing about this, but the point is that because of them, the temple where the sacrifices were done in Shiloh was destroyed after it had been in service for 369 years because of these bad priest shenanigans. Now, it's noteworthy that regarding our tabernacle, our Mishkan, and our temple, our Mikdash, there are no stories in the Bible about corrupt priests until you get to late in the Second Temple period. For example, the Hasmoneans didn't work out so well after that Maccabee generation. And there are other examples of bad priests in the Bible and in our history, and there was a time a trust issue. But in Leviticus, as we read it today, Tazria Metzora, no worries, Tazria Metzora gives us some better models. For example, if someone thought he or his house might be coming down with leprosy, or better, tzara'at. Tzara'at takes many forms, but it's certainly not actually leprosy. That's how it was translated, I think, from the King James Bible on up. But tzara'at is the word. If he thought he was coming down with tzara'at, he had to see a priest. And if he had tzara'at, it had been verified, he'd be sent outside the camp, expelled from the community, maybe for the rest of his life. That's in today's reading too. The priest is brought in at the earliest level to determine if what is observed is in fact that kind of disease, and what will be that person's fate. Now, it would be easy to judge the mitzorah, that's the one with the tzara'at, as a sinner, a loser, guilty, guilty, guilty. But the priest was obliged not to judge the person morally, only to take care of the disease and try to stop the spread. The priest had to show compassion for the mitzorah and do everything to determine if it was the plague or not before removing the person to an unclean place outside the community. They were just as concerned about the potential for spreading disease as we are today with the current plague that's fortunately around this area anyway is receding. But still, community health concerns were paramount. Did they know about masks? Probably not. Did they know about keeping social distance? Probably not. But they knew they had to do what they could to stop the spread. And that was for the greater good, the we of the community and not just the I. But the priest, who was not supposed to come in contact even with ritual impurity, had to overcome that and treat each person individually, understanding that they're distressed about this tzara'at thing. They had to give the benefit of the doubt and wait up to 2 weeks before pronouncing a suspected person was infected, because it was difficult emotionally to remove a person from society. Nobody wanted to do that. The priests knew the inner pain the stricken person had to feel and how the disease affected not only the skin, they had to look past that what it did to their skin, to engage with the person. Their attention to each individual, their efforts to take care of even the slightest signs of the condition point to their courage. They had to admit it, and it stirs our own hearts to think about it, frankly. These people were, if diagnosed, destined to live possibly their whole lives outside the fold of the community, labeled as, well, like lepers. Mitzorim, don't touch, they're the other. They've got tzara'at. The priests were able to appreciate the humanity of the other. It was actually part of the job. They had to follow the example of Aaron when they did it. The phrase rodef shalom, a pursuer of peace, first appears in Hillel's famous statement in Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, verse 12. Be among the disciples of Aaron, a lover of peace, ohev shalom, and a pursuer of peace, rodef shalom, a lover of all people, bringing them closer to the Torah. A few centuries later, another rabbinic text elaborates on Hillel's words. How does one be a rodef shalom? The phrase teaches us that a person should be a pursuer of peace among people, between each and every one. If a person sits in his or her place and is silent, how can he or she pursue peace among people, between each and every one? Rather, one should go out from one's own place and go searching in the world and pursue peace among people. Making peace is not a stay-at-home activity. Making peace is something you got to go out and do. So yeah, maybe there are some aspects of priesthood that we can adopt. Maybe we can seek God in the ways that our society deems proper. After all, who are the outcasts today? The mentally ill, the unemployed, the chronically disadvantaged. The new group in there is the unvaccinated. Maybe they should get vaccinated, but some people are stiff-necked and stubborn. But by acknowledging the humanity of our modern-day others, to see how they feel, to feel the pain of their disenfranchisement, and to take steps to relieve their immediate symptoms, that's always been considered God's work. In the middle of our narrative and in our laws, in the middle of the Torah, there's this strange book, Leviticus, that reminds us that we can help others, that we can serve others that we might see as less human, inferior, lower class, lower something, that because of their condition. We visit the sick. We help those causes even when we've already given, because we are a nation of priests. In our Parsha today, if we read it right, we're shown how to be more like priests as they go about performing the duties of the tabernacle as well as the duties of the heart. And just as the priest treats the other with compassion and the will for peace which came from their ancestor Aaron, we can see a little clearer just how we can be like that too. And it actually might take less effort than you think. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Baruch Tiyah. Now, as Zev gets set up for the Torah reading, I will tell you what's going on.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. What happened in the Parsha before we start our reading, as I mentioned before, because of the way the Jewish calendar works, we had a month 7 times every 19 years to keep things in order. Today we have a double Parsha to help correct for that. Parashat Tazria deals with a relatively inaccessible idea, that of ritual impurity or tumah. Coming in contact with the dead or being afflicted with certain skin conditions, badly translated as leprosy, or by coming in contact with certain bodily fluids that are related to creating life, like semen or menstrual blood or giving birth. Here are the rituals dealing with tumah, the rituals dealing with tumah are addressed, and all the procedures by the afflicted as well as those of the priests are described. The opportunity to bring a sacrifice presents the individual with a way to get closer to God's will. It's important to realize that there is no moral valence associated with this uncleanliness. It's just a state, making a spiritual distinction between what is appropriate for the priest to deal with and what needs fixing. Now, Parashat Mitsu continues prescribing rites and rituals for the purification of skin diseases. But the rabbis, knowing this would be hard to relate to, made a moral lesson from a wordplay. They took the name Mitzorah, saying that it was short for Motze Shem Ra, or harming somebody's reputation. Lashon Hara, gossip, saying something negative about somebody, even if it's true. They point to the episode where God gives Miriam leprosy, Tzara'at, because she says something about Moses' wife. And there are numerous guidelines in the laws of Lashon Hara, and we can talk about that sometime, as well as the problems of speaking well of someone, because depending on who is listening, it might not come out well. So if you want more details, let's have a talk about that. In the first Aliyah, starting on page 857, we lead off today's talking about the difference between different types of baldness that are okay and types that might be tzora'at. We also see the procedure, who is declared to have tzora'at and how that person is isolated from the camp. That's page 657, verse 40.
V'ish ki yamarid rosho kiryachu tahorhu. V'imi bahad banav yamarid rosho yibeyachu tahorhu. V'chiyev akarachad ovagabachad nega lavad adam dam tzarad porachadi. V'karachto v'gabachto ra'ota hakoehin. V'nisid hanega levanam dam demet. V'karachto v'gabachto K'marei tzarad or basar, ish tzaruahu tamehu, tamehi yitamenu hakoin broshon migo, vatzaruha, asher boha nega bigadav, yehu mim brosho yevaruha, v'al savam yetaha, tamei yikra, kol yemehi, asher hanega bo yitma tamehi Padad Yeshiv Michutz HaMachaneh Moshavo.
The second reading begins on page 658. Now you might think that leather and fabrics would not contract impurity, but in the second aliyah here you see that they do. And this continues through the next Aliyah as well. We're on page 658, verse 47.
והבגד כי יבוא נגד שרד, בבגד סמר או בבגד פשתים, או פשתי או בערב, לפשתים ולצמר, או באור או בחום מלאכת אור, ויהנגה ירקרק או אדם דם, בבגד או באור, או בשתי או בערב, או בכל כלי אור נגד שרדו, ורק את הכהן, for a kohen et hanaga, piskir et hanega shiva jamim, for a et hanega bayom hashvi, ki vasa hanega ba beged, ovashti ova erev, ova or, lechol asher yaseh or, li melacha, tarahat mameret hanega tamehu, bisaravet ha-beged, oh, et ashti oh et ha-erev, but semer oh, vavishtim, od kol kli haor asher yevo naga, kitzarat mameredi, ba'ish tizaref, v'im yireh hakohin, v'nei lo vasa nega, babeged, ovashti ova'erev, ovachol kli or, v'tziva hakohin, v'chibsu, eid asher bo hanaga, v'skiro shiva jamim, sheinit.
And this discussion continues with verse 55.
V'ra'akain acharehu kabezet hanega v'hinei lo hafach hanega deinav hanega lo vasa tamehu ba'ish tisrefenu becheteti b'karakto v'gabachto v'im ra'akain v'hinei ki hanega acharehu kabezoto v'karato mina beged o mina or o mina shti o mina erev v'im tira'eh od babeged o vashti o va'erev o v'chokli heor porachari va'ishtis revenu eid asher bo hanaga v'habeged o hashti o ha'erev o chokli haor asher tichabes v'sar mehem hanaga v'chabas shenit v'taher zol Torah negat tzarad beged hat semer o apishtim o hashti o ha'erev o kol kli or l'tahara o l'tamo.
We continue on page 660, and now we start with Parashat Mitsu. The text discusses the purification and reintegrating of the one stricken with tzara'at, what sacrifices he or she must bring to complete the process. A special note is the commentary under the line for chapter 14, verse 4 on page 660 in your Eitz Chaim. It talks about how disease can be a great equalizer, as both strong and weak can become ill. We are at the beginning of chapter 14 on page 660.
V'daber Adonai al Moshe lemar, zot tiyeh Torah mitzvah, b'yom toharata v'huva el hakohen, v'yatza hakohen amechutz labachaneh, v'ra'ah hakohen v'nei nirpad nega hatzarad min hatzarua, v'tziva hakohen v'lakach, la mitaher shtei tziporim chayot torot, v'etzeres v'shnei tolad v'ezov, v'tziva hakohen v'shachat el hatzipor echad, El kli cheres amayim chayim.
Yep, got to go to the mikveh. And then we have more of the purification sacrifices and offerings in the next reading. It's page 661, verse 6, right at the top there.
El hatzipor achaya yikach ota v'et ha'eres v'et shtei ha'tolad v'et ha'ezov v'tavalot ha'beit hatzipor achaya b'dam hatzipor ha'shchuta al amayim ha'chayim V'hizah al amitaher min hatzarat sheva ve'amim v'tihara v'shilach et hatzipor hachaya al pnei hasadeh v'chibes hamitaher et bigadav v'gilach et kol saro brachas pamayim mitaher v'chayavo el hamachaneh v'yashav michutz lo halo shivat yamim v'haya v'yom hashvi'i Yigalach et kol saro, et rosho vet zikano, veit gabo deinav, vet kol saro yigaleach, v'chibes et bigadav, bracha et bisaro b'mayim b'taher, v'yom hashmini, yikach shnei chabasim temimim, v'chav sachat bat shnatat tmimah, u'shlosha esrim, so et mincha b'lahav sheben, v'lo gechad shamen, v'min, HaKohen HaMitaher, Eid HaIsh, HaMitaher v'otam, Lifnei Adonai Pedach Ohel Moed, V'lakach HaKohen, Et HaKeves HaEchad, V'ikriv Oto, La'asham Bet Log HaShamen, V'nif Otam T'nufaha, Lifnei Adonai.
The sixth reading is the same, more of the purification sacrifices and offerings, and just the discussion just continues. We're on page 661, verse 13.
V'shachat et HaKeves bimkom, Asher yishchat et HaChatat, V'tala bimkom HaKodesh, Ki kachatat, Ashabu LaKohen Kodesh Kodashim Hu, V'lakach HaKohen, Midam Hasham Minatan HaKohen, Atziduch Osen Mitzaher HaYemanid, V'bohen Yado HaYemanid, V'bohen Raglo HaYemanid, V'lakach HaKohen Milog HaShamen, V'yatzak Al Kaf HaKohen HaSmalid, V'taval HaKohen, Et Espo HaYemanid, Bin Hashem Ben Asher Al Kapo HaSmalid, V'za Bin Hashem Ben Vetzpo Sheva Pamim Lifnei Adonai, Yeter Hashemen Asher Al Kapo, Yitein HaKohen Al Tenuch, Ozen Mitaher HaYemanid, V'bohen Yado HaYemanid, V'bohen Raglo HaYemanid, Adam Hasham, V'hanotar B'Shemen, Asher Al Kaf HaKohen, Yitein Al Rosh HaMitaher, V'chiper Alav HaKohen Lifnei Adonai, V'yasa HaKohen Et HaChatat, V'chiper Al HaMitaher Mitumato, V'achar Yishchat Et HaOlah, V'ela HaKohen Et HaOlah, V'et HaMincha HaMizbecha, V'chiper Alav HaKohen V'taher.
And our last reading today is at toward the bottom of 662. In the seventh aliyah, it talks about what to do if you can't afford to bring the requisite sacrifices. There's kind of a sliding scale depending on the means of the recovered. And that's page 662, verse 21.
V'im dalu v'inado mahaseged v'lakah, keves echad hasham l'tnufa l'chaper alav, v'sarol zaholet, echad balul b'shemen v'mincha v'lohog shamen, u'shtei torim, Oshtei b'nei Yonah asher tasi gado, v'yah echad chatad v'echad olah, v'vi adam, bayom hashmini l'toroto el hakohen, El Pedach Ohel Moed Lifnei Adonai, V'lakach HaKohen Et HaKeves HaSham Et Log HaShamen, V'niv Adam HaKohen Tnufa Lifnei Adonai, V'shachat Et Keves HaSham, V'lakach HaKohen Midam HaSham, V'natan Al Tenuch Ozen HaMitaher HaYemanid, V'abohen Yado HaYemanid, V'abohen Raglo HaYemanid, V'min HaShemen Yitzok HaKohen, Al Kaf HaKohen HaSmolid, V'ez HaKohen Betzbo HaYemanid, Min HaShemen, Asher Al Kapo HaSmolid, Sheva Pamim Lifnei Adonai, V'natan HaKohen, Min HaShemen, Asher Al Kapo, Al Tenuch, Ozen HaMitaher HaYemanid, V'abohen Yado HaYemanid, V'abohen Raglo HaYemanid, Al Mekom Dam HaSham, V'hanotar, Min HaShemen, Asher Al Kaf HaKohen, Yitein Al Rosh HaMitaher, L'chaper Alav Lifnei Adonai, V'yasa et ha'achad min ha'atorim, o min b'nei ha'yonah, me'asher tasig yado, et asher tasig yado, et ha'echad achadat v'et achad olah al ha'mincha, v'chiper ha'kohen al ha'mitaher lifnei Adonai, zohat tarad asher bo negat sarad asher lo tasig yado b'tohoroto.
Okay. Next week, we will cover another priestly topic, the scapegoat and the beginnings of the ritual of Yom Kippur. So you want to be here for that. Okay.
before we get to the Haftarah today, we will have the Misha Berach for people who need a prayer.
Misha Berach Avoteinu B'kor HaBiracha L'Moteinu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imoteinu B'kor HaBiracha L'Avoteinu. Bless those in need of healing, for the refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Amen. Now, as Zev is getting out the Haftarah book, today's Haftarah, I believe this is for Mitzorah.
Yes.
Yeah, Tazria and Mitzorah are combined, recite this Haftarah, yes. It's from 2 Kings chapter 7. It's a crazy story. It's a story about 4 lepers who are starving to death during the siege of Aram on Samaria. And it's a severe siege, and the lepers say, we're going to starve out here. We might as well go into the city. Either they'll kill us or they'll feed us. So they go, but the captors have all left because God made it sound like an invasion of Israelite troops, and so the Arameans fled. The lepers take some booty, and then they go tell the king of Shomron that the city is empty and everybody can return. Now the king does not trust the lepers. He thinks they'll be ambushed when they go back into the town, but it turns out the lepers were right, and food was plentiful again, selling at low prices. That was the prophecy of Elisha, the prophet, in the earlier part of the story. That's not in the Haftarah. And the king's aide, who doubted Elisha, got trampled under the crowd going in for food, which was also predicted by Elisha. The story emphasizes that lepers can be good people, and the disease is not necessarily a punishment. And if it wasn't for the lepers, the people might have starved. So let's think about the next time we encounter somebody from the outside, from the fringes of society. Not everybody is there to be against us.
Yeah, and I think after this, they made this thing a Hug a Leper T-shirt. It was very popular in Shomron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very hot seller.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, this is the anniversary of my daughter Jacqueline's bat mitzvah, 8 years since her bat mitzvah. I'm sure many of you watching were there on that occasion in the sanctuary. And so I dedicate this recitation of the Haftarah, of course, to her. Mazel tov. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim ratzav v'divreim hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abachir b'tuvav Moshe avdo v'Yisrael amo v'nvi'amed v'tzedek. Arba nashim hayu mitzorayim pedach hashar v'yomru yisharehu ma'anachnu Yoshvim bo'ad madnu, imamarnu, navo ha'ir, v'rav ba'ir v'amadnu sham, im yashavnu v'ho v'amadnu, v'yadaha l'chlev v'nipla, el machanei aram, im yachayunu niche, v'im yimitunu v'amadnu, v'yakumu v'neshev, lavo el machanei aram, v'yavo, ad kitzei machanei aram, v'nei shamish, Vadonai, Ishmeah, and Machanei Aram, Kol Rechev Kosus, Kol Chayil Gadol, Vayomru, Ishalach Liv, Hine, Sachar Aleinu, Melech Yisrael, and Machei Achitiv, and Machei Mitzrayim Lavo, Aleinu. Vayakulmu, Vayanusu, Vaneshem, Vayasu, and Oholehem, Vetsusem, Velchamorehem, Hamachaneh Kasheri, Vayanusu al Nafsham, Vayavo Mitzoraim Ha'ile, Agitzi Hamachaneh, Vayavo, Elohel Echad Vechlev Vayishtu, Vayisu Misham, Kesev Vizav Vigadim, Vayechu Vayat Mino, vayashuvu vayavohu elo el acher, vayisuhu misham, vayachlu vayatminu, vayamru isharehu, lochin anachnu osim, hayom hazeh, yom Yisrahu, vanachnu machshim, vikinu, vichikinu, ador haboker, mitzanu avon, viatalechu vinavoha, vinagida beit hamelech, vayavohu vayikru, el shoher ha'ir, vayagidu lahem le'mohor ba'u, amachanei aram, v'nei ein sham ish v'kol adam, ki masus asur, v'chamohor asur, v'ohalim kasher hima, vayikraha, hashoharim v'agidu veit hamelech b'nimaha, vayakom hamelech la'ila vayomer, el avadav, hagidan alachem eid asher asalanu aram, yadil kirevim anachnu, v'yetsu min hamachaneh, lehachiva v'sadeh le'mor, ki yetsu min ha'ir, v'nit b'seim chayim, ve'el ha'ir navaho vayan, echad me'avadav vayomer, vayichuna, chamisha min asusim, hanisharim asher nisharu vaha, hinaham, kichol hamon Yisrael, asher nisharu vaha, hinaham, kichol hamon Yisrael, asher tamu, nishlecha v'nireh, vayichul shnei rechev susim, vayishlach hamelech acharei machanei aram, le'mor lechu eru, vayechu achareihem, ahad ayodin v'nei kol haderech, meleha v'gadim v'chelim, asher yishlichu aram b'chavzam, vayashuvu hamalachim, vayagidu lamelech, vayitzei ha'am vayavozu, eid machanei aram vayihi, sahar soled b'shekel, v'satahayim sorim b'shekel, kidvar Adonai v'amelech, hivkinet hashalish asher nishan al gado al hashar, v'yirmisu ha'am b'shar v'yamod, kasher diber ish Elohim, asher diber beredet hamelech leilahav, v'yihi kidaber ish Elohim el hamelech leimor, satayim surim b'shekel, usa soled b'shekel yehem, ke'eit machar b'shahar shomron, vayan hashalish, edish Elohim vayomar, v'nei Adonai, ose arubol b'shamayim, hayehiyeh kedavar hazeh, vayomer hincha roeh, beinecha, umishaham lo tochel, vayihi lo kehin, vayirmisu oto am, b'shahar, vayamod. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzor kol olamim, tzadik b'chol darot, elanim ahad ha'amer v'yoseh, medaber mekayim, shekol devarav v'medvad tzedek, ne'eman atah Adonai Eloheinu, v'ne'emanim l'varecha, v'devar echad midvarecha, kol lo yashov rikam, ki hamelech ne'emam rachaman atah, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu b'chol devarav,
Amen.
Rachim al tziyagim ein chayinu v'lalu b'nefesh tosheyah b'mirav yameinu, Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo.
v'samech tziyahod b'vaneha,
Amen.
Samachleinu Adonai Eloheinu v'yahan avi avdecha, v'machu b'davi v'shichecha b'mirah yavaha v'yagel libeinu, ha'kisah ha'yishev zar v'lo yinchalu al'achirim ekavodo, ki v'shem kodechecha nishbad alaha, shalach ben irah le'olam ba'ed, Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo.
Magid David,
Amen.
al Torah v'al avodah v'al nevi'im v'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, shenatad alanu Adonai Eloheinu l'kdushav l'mnucha lecha v'hod l'tivaret, al Adonai Eloheinu אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Shemo.
מקדש השבת.
Amen. Shekoach.
ברוך תהיה.
We now return to our blue Sidurim, the Sim Shalom for Shabbat and holidays, and we will read together, me and you at home,
The last paragraph on the page is a prayer for our country. May this land, under your providence, be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us all say, Amen. Lo yisa goy el goy cher, lo yilmedu od milchama. Lo yisa goy el goy cher, lo yilmedu od milchama. V'nomar amen. Makor Chaim, source of all life, we ask for a quick end to hostilities around the world, foreign and domestic, and the swift and safe return of our young men and women to their homes. And let us all say, Amen. A prayer for the state of Israel. Page 149. Avinu sheba shemayim, tzur Yisrael v'goalo, barech medinat Yisrael, reshit tzmichat gulatenu. Again Aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros Aleha sukat shlomecha, ushlach orcha v'yamidcha le'urosheha, soreha v'yoatzeha, v'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha. Chazek e'idei meginei eretz kodshenu, v'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, v'yateret nitzachon teatren, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam le'yoshveha, v'nomar, Amen. And we continue on page 151 with, if you say Ashrei 3 times a day, you're guaranteed a place in the world to come. So says the Mishnah.
Ashrei Yoshvei ve'eitecha odi ha'alelucha sehela.
Ashrei ha'am shekacha lo, Ashrei ha'am she'Adonai Elohav.
Tile David imcha Elahai ha'melech v'abrach ha'shimcha le'olam va'ed.
B'chol yom avachecha v'alala shimcha le'olam va'ed.
Gadol Adonai mehulam miyod ve'ligdalato ein cheker.
Dor lidor yishabach ma'asecha ugvuratecha yagidu.
Adagivot hodecha v'divrei nivlodecha asicha.
V'zuz norotecha yomeru ugedulatcha asaprena. Chanun v'rachum Adonai erech apayim ugedal chased.
Tov Adonai lahakol v'racham avakol ma'asa.
Yuducha Adonai kol ma'asecha v'chasidecha yivarchucha.
Kivo malachutecha yomeru gevuratecha yidabehevru.
L'hodia livnei ha'adam gevurotav u'chevod hadar malchuto.
Malachutecha malchut k'lolamim memshalecha b'chodor vador.
Somech Adonai l'chol hanoflim v'zokef l'chol hakfufim.
Hinei chlelecha yisabiru v'atanoten lahem edochlam b'ito.
Poteach et yadecha u'masbiya l'chol charatzon.
Sadik Adonai b'chodiracha v'chasid b'chol mazov.
Karov Adonai l'chol chorav l'chol asher yikru v'emet.
Ritzon yueyav yahaseh v'yet Shabbatam yishma v'yoshim.
Shomer Adonai et kol ohav v'et kol rishayim yashmi.
Tilat Adonai daber bi v'varech ha'basar shem kodsho le'olam ba'ed.
V'anachnu nevarech yam et aviyad olam. Hallelujah. And we can turn to page 154.
Ti
We continue on page 155 with the Hatzi Kaddish that ends the Torah service and takes us into the Musaf. Amen. Beit Yisrael, Bagala, Bagala, Zman Kariv. Amen. Yeshmei Rabba Mevorach, L'olam Elmaya, Yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitbar v'yitman v'yitnaseh v'yithadar, v'yithaleh v'yithalal, shemere kudeshah.
Brichu.
V'yihila mincha birlachata v'shirata,
Tushbechata v'nechemata,
Da'amiram b'yoma v'imrel.
Amen. We will pray together on page 156b and the Kedusha on page 157, and then we finish silently from page 158 to 161.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Hayel HaGadol, HaGibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Kamel Chasadim Davi v'Gonei HaGahol, V'dacher Chasdei Avot, V'mevi Goel Livnei Bneihem, V'mahan Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer V'Gin Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Gin Sarah, Adagi Bor Leolam Adonai, Mechei Metim Ada, Rav L'Hoshiyah,
Morid Hatal, Kel Chaim B'Chesed,
Mechayim Meitim V'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, U'Matir Asurim, U'Mekayim Emunatahu, L'Shenei Afar, B'Chamocha B'Gevurot, U'Mido Melach, Melech Memit, U'Mechayeh, U'Matzmiach Yeshua, V'nemanatach Chayot Metim. Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh HaMetim.
157.
Na'aritzecha v'na'akdishecha, Kisod Siyach, Sarvei Kodesh, Hamakdishim, Shimcha B'Kodesh, Ka'katuv, Hayat Nevi'echa, V'kara Zel Zev Yamar,
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivot, Melech Haaretz Kavodo.
Kavodam Aliyohalam, Misharido Shvalim Zelazeh, Aimikom Kivodo, L'madam Baruch Yomeru,
Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo.
Mimkomo, Liven Berachamim,
Berachamim.
V'yachonam, Ha'miachadim Shemo. Erev Bechol Yom Damid, Pamayim B'Yava, Shema Omrim, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Eloheinu, Avinu,
Makeinu, Mosheinu, Vehu, Yashmeinu, Yashmeinu, Birachama, Sheinit, Yalachem Elohim.
Ani Adonai Elohechem.
V'vedivrei kol shecha katuv le'imor,
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Melech HaTzion, לדור ודור, hallelujah.
לדור ודור נגיד גלך, לנזלה נצח נשדך נגדי, ששבחך אלוהינו בפינו ובשלום בהד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש, אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני,
Baruch Baruch Shemo.
האל הקדוש.
158 to 161. And we end the Musaf and head into our concluding prayers on page 181 with Kaddish Shalem.
Amen.
Amen.
Yitbrawin shabach, yitbrawin mamanaseh, v'david alevet al shamid, yikodesh.
Brichu.
Leila mikol berchata v'shivata, shuvachata v'lechamata, d'mrama l'ma v'gimero.
Amen.
Tid gabel sodon v'odon v'chol Yisrael. Kadam avahon v'shmaiha v'gimero.
Amen.
Tish lam alam v'shmai v'chayim alinu v'chol Yisrael v'gimero.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramam, u'yazeh shalom aleinu. Ve'al Gal Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu. Ve'al Gal Yisrael, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu. Ve'al Gal Yisrael, imru,
Amen. Page 182 in Kelohenu.
Ein Kelohenu, ein Gadonenu, ein Gemalkeinu, ein Gemoshienu, mi Kelohenu, mi Gadonenu, mi Gemalkeinu, mi Gemoshienu. Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shekhiru, Avu Hodeinu, Livanecha Kedoret Hasami.
And page 183, Elenu L'Shabech.
Alinu L'Shabech
Ladon HaKol, Lateit Gedula Liotzer Breshit. Asanu Kigoye Ratzot, Lo Samanu, Kimishvahot Adama, Sam Chalkenu Kahem, עלינו ככל המונם, אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים לפני מלך המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא נוטה שמיים ויוצר הארץ ויורו בשמיים ממעל נרוזו שכין נרוזו וגבהי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. היה אדוני לך כל הארץ ביום ההוא אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. There's going to be a short delay here because I have to get coming to get the website list.
Oh, okay. We're taking a moment. We're going to get the current yurt site list. So I hope all of you are enjoying your Shabbat and had a nice week last week. I was thinking, reflecting upon the anniversary of my daughter's bat mitzvah, and it's still bizarre for me to think that this is the second anniversary that we've held in Cybershul for that and for everything since March of last year. But it sure is wonderful that you've taken the time and made it part of your routine to be with us, and we certainly appreciate that. And we all know the day is coming when we'll be able to gather here again in the chapel as a congregation face to face, like old times. So I think about that, by the way, when we sing Eitz Chaim Hi. You know, Eitz Chaim Hi, the last line of Eitz Chaim Hi is Chadesh Yameinu Kikedem. Renew our days as of days of old. And that takes on special significance when we sing that, Rabbi and I, here in this sanctuary in Cybershul, knowing that we really, as wonderful as it is that we can participate together, it's not the same as when we are together. So I'll leave it at that. And like your teacher in high school might say, you know, ponder that for a moment. And we'll continue in just a moment with the list of yurt sites and the Mourner's Kaddish. And without much further ado, here he is, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from the multi-purpose room, Rabbi Joel Berman.
All right, now settle down.
I spaced out on a couple of things this week. Okay, in solemn testimony to the unbroken faith, which links one generation to the next, those in mourning or observing a yurt site, now rise to praise the name of God with the words of the Mourner's Kaddish on page 184. But first, yurt sites to observe this week include Melvin Abramovitz, Deborah Abrams, Morris Ash, Julius J. Baskin, Beatrice Belsky, Helen Black, Henry M. Deutsch, Mary Earnhardt, Louis Enton, Irving Feldman, Jacob Fireman, Bertha Cecilia Fleischer, Aaron Frankel, Ida Goldblatt, Arlene Gottlieb, Anthony Halperin, Sylvia Kessler, Rose Lazinski, Beatrice Lieberman, Louis Litke, Teresa Litke, Ann Dora Lyon, Dr. Henry Manassi, Dr. Robert Manassi, Elaine Marks, Irving Marlin, Joseph Tischler Menaker, Milton Michaels, Alfred Moser, Isidore Nadridge, Molly Posner, Rose Prince, Sarah Rosenblum, David Charles Ross, Shirley Schwartz, Evelyn Gertrude Sherman, William Silverman, Benjamin Similogis, Alfred Strauss, Florence Weinberg, Frida Wilkoff, Jack Melvin Winnick, and Irvin S. Zane. Mourner's Kaddish is on page 184. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Bi'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'gala uvizman kariv v'yimru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mivorach li'olam ulumei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei d'kudsha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiron mi'oma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Now, if it's comfortable for you, I'm asking you, you are invited to rise for Kiddush.
V'sham Reuven Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, V'asod et ha-Shabbat, L'doro damri dalam, Be'eni, U've'bnei Yisrael oti, V'olam gishesh adamim, Asadonai, et ha-shamayim et haaretz, U'vayam hashvi, Shabbat v'yi nafash, Haki birach l'nayim ha-Shabbat v'agdasheh,
L'chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei bri hagafen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. Fresh this last week?
Just like it just came out of the freezer.
You can't get frozen fresh like that.
No, it's a hearkening back to the old days.
Yeah, exactly. Return to normalcy.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. You were talking about, being here face to face pretty soon, and we're looking at that as not so much as a vague foreign date anymore. We're looking at something a little bit more concrete, and we're getting closer to it. But I just want to caution everybody: you got to wear pants. We're not in a Zoom meeting here.
Exactly.
The other thing I spaced out about was announcements. I had them already on the computer, and then I had to close the computer before I was done on Shabbat, and I forgot to run them off. So let's see what we can construct here.
Announcements. Well, let's see. What's coming up?
Well, Women's League is still accepting Count Your Blessings donation,
That's for sure. They already had their celebration of music.
and they have Women's League Shabbat. Is that next?
Yeah, Women's League Shabbat, actually. That's the thing. That's next Shabbat.
It is.
Yeah, April 24th, we're going to have one of our video services, and the Women's League and their members will be participating extensively in that.
Right.
So please tune in for that. It should be special. And for those of you, let me say this, those of you in Women's League that are participating and still haven't sent me a video about what you're doing, please do so soon, so I can get those to Colleen to make sure they're incorporated properly and timely into the service.
Yeah, they don't get in until they get to us.
Yeah, and I thank all of those of you who have already sent me your videos. Just a little sort of housekeeping for Women's League Shabbat.
Right. And I guess the next big thing coming up is Shavuot.
Yeah.
And that'll be, I think, May 16th at night.
Yes, the 16th, 17th, and 18th.
Yeah.
And the 18th is Yisker, and let's see, is anything?
We'll do some kind of countdown till Shavuot. We'll do something like that.
Why don't we count the Omer?
Yeah, we already did though.
We already counted the Omer today.
We'll stick with that until we get there.
Yeah, we don't have to reinvent the Omer.
Not too complicated. We'll just go day by day. We'll figure it out. We'll get there.
We'll get there. Okay, so that's about all I can think of. And
Yeah. Like Forrest Gump said after addressing that big crowd in front of the Washington, at that mall.
Yeah,
And that's all I got to say about that,
that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah,
That was a great movie,
it was.
yeah. Okay, page 187.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nivra V'Ein Azav V'Chefso Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Azai Melech Shemo
Nikra
V'Yacharei Yiklad HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'Hu Haya V'Hu Ove V'Hu Yiyeh B'Tifara V'Hu Yiyeh
B'tifara
V'hu echad v'yein sheni l'cham shelo l'hach b'hira v'li reishit v'li tachlit v'lo ha'oz v'ha'misra v'lo ha'oz
V'ha'misra
v'hu Eli v'chai go'ali v'tzorech evli v'yitzara v'hu nisi v'manosi v'nad kosi v'yom ekra v'nad kosi
B'yom Ekra
B'yado Avkei ruchi v'yei tishan v'ya'ira v'yei ruchi v'yati Adonai li v'lo ira Adonai li v'lo ira
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.